Hello and welcome to Transfermarkt TV. My name is Stefan Bienkowski, he's Manuel, Veth, and today we are back to round up what was an absolutely fascinating transfer window. Huge amount of business happened in Europe's top leagues, but what many didn't suspect but ended up being a huge part of the summer was Saudi Arabia muscling in on the action. Manu, obviously people will be able to tell from the title of this video, they spent just under €1 billion signing players from around the world, most of that going obviously to European clubs. Why don't you quickly just kind of run through the major numbers and figures that our viewers should be made aware of?
Yeah, and I mean, it could have been more, right? They went in really late for Mo Salah, and I think the final offer was something like £210 million, so that's like 250 million euros. It would have been a world record transfer fee, and I don't think the final word is spoken on that yet. So they would have broken the €1 billion mark. They did not. They were just underneath it with €956 million spent on 287 players. That ranks them second, just behind the Premier League, ahead of La Liga, ahead of the Bundesliga, ahead of Serie A. So, they did send quite a big benchmark. And I pulled the numbers from Transfermarkt, and they're all available on Transfermarkt. So feel free to play around with those numbers yourself, because we have all those statistics. But in terms of clubs transfer spend, in the top 10, we have Al Hilal with €353 million spent on players. And these are just transfer fees, right? The salaries are not even in that yet. 8th is Al Ahly with 197 million, and 10th is Al Nassr with 165 million, and then 18th is Al Ittihad with 119 million. So these were the four big clubs that spent the majority of the money when it comes to the Saudi Pro League. So mind-boggling numbers. Do you also look, for example, Al Hilal, essentially 353 million spent. Their market value or the squad value is still around only 250 million euros. Mind-boggling numbers, Stefan. And as I said, when you look at some of the salaries that are being paid, Sadio Mane is, for example, a transfer that we covered very closely. He leaves Bayern Munich, and he's now on 40 million euros, right? So we don't even factor those numbers into this video, or it's general on Transfermarkt, because we don't do salaries. But it's just been an insane amount of money, and I think it's really shaking up the football world.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's probably fair to say that the kind of Hollywood move, or the kind of poster boy of that move, of course, Cristiano Ronaldo would probably disagree with this, and maybe Karim Benzema would too, but obviously Neymar's move from PSG was the one that kind of made a lot of people kind of sit up and pay attention to what was going on here, because I think it's probably fair to say that prior to that, a lot of these moves were kind of players from like kind of mid-table Premier League clubs or Bundesliga, La Liga, Liga 1, players who were certainly good enough, but not the kind of ones who, would be sitting on the front cover of FIFA, for example, quite like Neymar. And let's kind of narrow in on that Neymar transfer, because it's probably a good one to kind of maybe focus on maybe what the Saudi Pro League's intentions are here. We did a video recently on Neymar and his time at PSG. People can go back and watch that. And, it seems quite salient now, because we were kind of discussing the fact that maybe he should have moved on. I don't think either of us expected him to move to this club that he did. But, is this a case of, we've seen other nations do this in the past. Obviously, China's a good example. Once upon a time, US soccer was often accused of doing this itself, where they kind of would just swoop in, buy the kind of older, injury-prone players, for merchandising and all sorts. And they would never actually, it never was a huge focus on actually putting together a sporting project. Is this different from the Saudi Pro League? Do you think clubs in Europe are worried, or is it just more of the same, and this is just a cyclical thing, and today it's Saudi, tomorrow it could be someone else?
Tomorrow it could be Qatar, right? Because they're also starting to spend quite a bit of money. One story that we're covering is Ferrati. But yeah, you're quite right in narrowing in on Neymar and the amount of money that was spent on him. €90 million transfer fee, just underneath €100 million, right? And there's bonuses and add-ons and all that stuff included. And I thought that deal in particular was really interesting. We have a story up on Transfermarkt on PSG and the amount of money that they've earned from Saudi, but also from Qatar, right? And the connections that the club has used to sort of unload bad contracts, you have to say, right? And how it's really benefited them to get the maneuverability that they needed to bring in new players and fresh players, Kolumani, for example, for just under 100 million euros. And a lot of clubs and other leagues in Europe are concerned that this is a sort of a circumnavigation of financial fair play and the financial fair play regulations, right? Because Neymar's market value is significantly below the 90 million euros that were spent on him, right? And you have to, not only do PSG get money from the transfer fee, but they also get to offload his deal completely. And the way transfer fees work, income you get immediately. When you spend something, you can actually write that off over several years, right? Over the term of the contract. I want to point out that PSG are not the only club that did this. We did a video recently on Chelsea, right? And they have been quite successfully offloading some of their bad contracts to Saudi as well. So I don't want to narrow in just on PSG here. It's just a really interesting example where other clubs sort of said, what's going on here? I mean, Borussia Dortmund publicly outspoken, their chief financial director of finance, Dres, at the ECA, that's the European Club Association, for example, spoke out against this. Watzke had to then apologize. That's the CEO of Dortmund, of course, had to apologize for those comments to PSG. But, there is concerns in European football here what these deals could do to financial fair play in general. And I think that is something really interesting to keep an eye on. One of the things that was mentioned to me was it's not even the transfer fees per se that worry some of the leagues. The Bundesliga, for example, is a league that really pressed for this, but Serie A and La Liga, the two, is the salaries that are being paid. That all of a sudden Saudi is not just paying these high transfer fees, which benefits a lot of clubs, right? Across different leagues because they get money. But what they're really worried about is the salaries being paid, and that all of a sudden clubs from bigger European leagues or clubs that are owned by a single entity or a rich person, will say, well, we have to financially compete with those salaries being paid in Saudi, so we have to pay higher salaries to our players, and then they would maybe put pressure on financial fair play rules being softened that some of these other leagues fought really hard for implementing in the first place, right? So I think this is really the interesting thing here to watch. It's not really that clubs are worried about losing talent, because you're right. A lot of the talent that's leaving is players that they wanted to get off their books anyways, right? But it's some of the financial implications that our clubs are worried about.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people do say, well, the Premier League spends money, so why can't Saudi spend money? But I think it is worth pointing out that the Premier League spending spree over the last 5 or 10 years has come with repercussions. It has come with consequences. If you look around European football, a lot of clubs would complain that it's not really the transfer fees, it's the wage inflation that has come about from football as a whole because of the kind of pool of the Premier League's money. PSG obviously played their part in that as well in terms of the money they've spent in France as well. So that's a really interesting thing to point out. Maybe it's not the transfer fees, maybe it's the actual overall wage inflation that could come from Saudi spending this money over the years to come. But I guess, Manu, we're just going to have to wait and see what happens, aren't we? We're only one transfer window arguably into this, and I guess that January and maybe next summer will be the time that we can actually kind of understand their full intentions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, as you said, China came, 3 or 4 windows, and then it was done. The Chinese government shut it down. Obviously, Saudi is opening itself up to the world, which I personally think is a positive. And so right now you have a regime in place that is willing to spend, that tries to be more open towards the world, right? I'm not saying everything is perfect there, quite far from it. I'm not a political analyst. I'm a soccer journalist. I'm leaving that to other people. But it's, obviously they're trying to open themselves up to the world. But everyone who knows a little bit about Saudi history knows that this can change overnight. If there's a different person coming in, this will be shut down just as quickly as China shut down their transfer spending of their clubs. So that is maybe something to keep an eye on. How long will this last? Is this forever, or is this just something that's going to be for 3 or 4 windows and these European clubs can just offload their bad contracts for the time being? I mean, it is a really, really interesting thing. I caution to compare it maybe to MLS, because MLS seems to they splash the money, but not like this. When they did it once they do it targeted. They say, okay, this is a marquee player that can really help us. Lionel Messi is a great example. We did a video on that as well, right? But they're more cautionary in terms of building the project. And it's been now, 26 or 27 years there that it's worked. Saudi has to show that they can do this as well. Not just for 3 or 4 transfer windows, but have the staying power to do this and really build something over 2 decades.
Yeah, well, whether it's only for the next 12 months or for the next 12 years, you can keep on top of it all on Transfermarkt. We obviously have the transfer balance page, which shows you how much money all the leagues spend over the course of this season. You can even narrow in on specific clubs. As Manu said, a number of the Saudi clubs focusing and featuring in the kind of top 10 there. And of course, you can keep on top of all the transfer rumours between now and the January window in our transfer rumour mill as well. So until next time, when I'm sure we'll be back in January if they spend another billion. But until then, do make sure to subscribe to the page, like this video, let us know what you guys think of Saudi spending in the summer transfer window. And until next time, we'll see you soon.